Thank you for stopping by Nurture Small Business Podcast. I am your host, Denise Kagan. If you're looking for stories that lift up women business owners, both in their personal and professional lives, you are at the right place. As always, if you like what you hear on today's podcast, please share it. You have my gratitude for doing so.
I visited my granddaughter's daycare, and in the daycare, they teach them about choices, red choices, green choices, and yellow choices, mostly just red and green, but my granddaughter has a lot of yellow choices. That is the start of emotional intelligence. Could you imagine that? We're teaching that to toddlers, and we have some adults that don't even know what emotional intelligence is and how to activate it and use it. So today's guest is a certified Gallup Strengths coach, certified Wiley Disc practitioner. She also holds a master's degree in organizational leadership from Gonzaga University. Her work helps businesses foster a culture of engagement and connectedness and enables them to achieve greater success. Welcome, Erica Emmett.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me today, Denise.
I am excited. Emotional intelligence is a topic that I don't think we could talk enough about, to be honest with you.
I agree. And I love that you started with the fact that your granddaughter's preschool is teaching it. One of the topics that I teach in my leadership course is diversity and inclusion, but not from the aspect that we normally talk about race, gender, sexual orientation, but from the multi-generation workforce. And I had one of the most eye-opening conversations in my last cohort between Gen Z, millennials, and Gen X. My question was, can you remember a time when you had great bosses with high emotional intelligence? And the Gen Xers were like, oh yeah, I remember those. And the Gen Z said to me, if I was in a job interview and I felt like the manager did not have high emotional intelligence, regardless of the pay, I would never take that job.
Good for them.
And we were shocked. It was so incredible to hear that is now a requirement for the younger generation. And for my takeaway to talk to other business managers and team leaders and leadership teams, it's not that the younger generation does not want to work, which is what we love to hear. We love to say. That's not true. They do want to work. They want meaningful work, and they want to know that the people around them have high emotional intelligence and are going to lead with emotional intelligence. And that makes sense that your preschool is teaching it.
Absolutely. You know what? I don't think I termed it emotional intelligence back then. I think I just said the person was a jerk. I interviewed for someone with another company, actually one of the same types of companies, but they're not quite franchisees, they're licensees. And at the time, it was a competing or a tangential licenseship for the territory. And it would have been at least 50% increase in income. And when they called me back for the second interview, I said, no, thank you. Because you could really tell that the person, just some of the questions that they asked were, and do you think you're worth 50% more? I mean, just a question like that. It's like, why, if I wasn't here and if you didn't think my qualifications spoke for themselves, why are we even having this conversation? So it told me a lot about the person. And fortunately, I also had some good guides and said, go with your gut on that one.
Right.
Who knew the person?
Well, and also that almost leads to why so many people, especially women entrepreneurs, have imposter syndrome. Because if we're of a certain age, we have been raised and managed by people asking us that question. Are you sure you deserve this? Is that too much? Are you qualified for that?
I used to get that all the time with a professional organization too. It used to, tick me off. That wasn't the words I was going to use, but I decided to stick with PC. It used to really tick me off. It's like, you could see he was never asking any of the men this, but always with me, where do you get this information from? How do you know this? I just know stuff, dude. And yes, it was a dude.
Yes, of course it was. Of course it was.
It's interesting also that you mentioned imposter syndrome because that came up recently with one of my team members. So any
Oh, wow.
thoughts on how this emotional intelligence and imposter syndrome, how they relate and how we can, as women, support each other to get through this? We're not imposters. We're not fakes.
We're really not. And I think that the number one thing that we need to do as women, I have a 13-year-old daughter. I talked to her about this. If I have some young Gen Zs captured in the sauna at the gym, I will also unsolicited advise them, which is we have to have each other's back. We really do. I'm Gen X, and I think we get it a little bit, but we're torn between how we were raised and the age of our children. We have to have each other's backs as women. We have to support each other. We have to stop judging each other so harshly, which I realize a lot of times comes because we judge ourselves so harshly. But also, I think self-awareness is so important. And that's the main reason I became a Gallup Strengths coach is as I launched this company last year, I was looking at different assessments just to see which ones I really liked. I knew I liked DISC. I had done it 15 years in sales. I tried the Gallup Strengths assessment, and it was as if a mirror had been held up. It was a reflection. When I got my report back, it was a reflection of me. All the good parts and some of the bad, they talk about our blind spots. And when I had that mirror held up to me and it said, you asked too many questions, air quoting, because you have high input. So that is not a idiosyncrasy. It is not a personality quirk. It is one of your innate talents. Yes, it may annoy people, but guess what? Lean into it. And then I started being more intentional about leaning into what I am innately good at and not trying to do the things I'm not and not apologizing for doing those things, right? I was always the kid who raised my hand, who volunteers first, and I ask a lot of questions, even when other people are like, you know the answer, stop asking. So I think as women, doing something, whether it's the Gallup assessment or some other exercise or some support group that allows you to become more self-aware of who you truly are, what you're really good at. And deep down, we always knew it. We just let people tell us we're not. And then leaning into that, because imposter syndrome is really hard to accept when you know who you are and you know where your strengths are and you know what your talents are. And you can say to someone who says, wow, that's really annoying. Why do you do that? It's because it's what makes me awesome.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Okay. You chose to come from a sales background to start your own company. I didn't actually realize you had started just last year. Congratulations. Why, tell me about your journey a little bit.
So my journey overall, it's funny. My journey is another area where my whole life people have looked at me kind of like cockeyed, like, what? Why? Why are you doing that? But in my gut, it felt right. I knew that even though to the rest of the world, the next step sounded crazy, to me, it just made sense. I grew up in Illinois. I was first generation college student. I wanted to be a lawyer because that made money. I moved to DC after college. That's where the lawyers are. That's how I could get on Capitol Hill. I had the opportunity to move to China. I took it. While I was in China, I fell in love with jobs that were outside working with animals. I found an American veterinarian. I asked her if I could have a job. Boom, I got into veterinary medicine. Came back to the US, got licensed as a nurse, and I worked in clinics for 10 years. Then I moved into sales for about 15 years. After sales, I really started becoming aware that I was most happy when my sales clients would come to me for a problem that had nothing to do with sales. I would have a practice manager come to me and say, can you help me ask for a promotion? Can you help me find a job in sales? I'm having issues with my staff. Can you help me with that? Had nothing to do with what I was selling. And I realized that I have this ability to connect with people and they come to me for help. So I wanted to move into professional development, but I was roadblocked in sales. As you're really good at sales, why would you want to leave sales? So I left sales a few years ago and moved into recruitment and talent development. During that time, I really just started to see people becoming very disengaged, very high turnover. And from the recruitment side, understanding that recruitment way more expensive than retention.
Mm-hmm.
How could I help you retain your employees? Unfortunately, last year, I lost a colleague to suicide. And at that point, I realized my dream job, kind of like what you said, it's $50,000 more. I had my dream job. The leadership was so toxic. If you didn't answer a text on Sunday night, they were blowing up your phone. They were monitoring people sitting at their desk from 8 to 5. I was like, this isn't how we work anymore. And I left that job, that quote unquote dream job, to start this company to really help people understand themselves so that they can fulfill their dreams, their lives, just do what they do best every day. And that's how I stumbled into starting my own company.
Wow, you have an interesting background. So I heard law, veterinary medicine, real medicine, the people medicine, not the veterinary medicine is not real. I have 2 dogs, so it totally is real. Then I heard, wait a minute, sales and then recruitment. So those are like 5 very distinctively different areas, to be honest with you. I mean, there might be a tiny bit of overlap in some of them. So that makes you have an immense amount of knowledge, in my opinion. I like that.
Well,
That's
thank you.
impressive.
And again, exactly what you said is what most people in my life, like my friends and family, they're like, what? How does that connect? And in my gut and in my brain, it just did. I was like, how is this not a natural progression to you?
And that's okay. I don't need you to justify it to me. You already said up front that you did. So how do you work with people to get them to the point where they're just comfortable with being who they are and having the emotional intelligence to have those conversations? Because they're not always easy conversations. I remember when I left a corporate job and started my first company, my brother was like, "You're stupid. You're leaving a job with benefits and this and this." And yeah, I don't know why you're doing this. Now he's my biggest fan when it comes to like, yeah, look at my sister, what she's done. He wasn't at first.
It's really just about slowing down and being silent in the moment where you need emotional intelligence to show up, either for yourself or for the person you're talking to. In the class, when we talk about emotional intelligence, it really pops up a lot for different areas. We talk about, Gallup Strengths. We talk about servant leadership, diversity and inclusion, active listening. And in all of those areas of life, you need emotional intelligence for the relationship to move forward, right? Or for a situation to move forward. Being silent is usually the first step. And being silent in your brain and in your mouth. Right? It's like, okay, let me hear what's happening. Let me think about before I respond. When we were kids, our parents were like, count to 10 before you respond. Maybe not everybody had their mom tell them that, but I did a lot. And so it's about just kind of showing up for yourself. If you're talking to someone that you want to yell at, just like zip it. If they're yelling at you, it's hard to stay silent, but 2 people yelling at each other is not going to get anywhere. So, of course, I will always start with, hey, let's do the Gallup Strengths assessment. And if you don't want to pay for it, I'll pay for it for you because I believe in it that much. Because again, understanding what you bring to the table is important, not from the aspect of what other people have told you through the years that you bring to the table, but what you've always thought deep down in your gut you bring to the table. And then you can kind of have this assessment tell you, yeah, you're right. Even in my top 5 Gallup strengths, I have strategic, which means I can pivot easily. I'm adaptable, which my life shows you that, right? I can easily pivot and adapt.
Absolutely.
Yes. So I think being silent is important. I think understanding like what is upsetting us. Are you coming into a situation with a preconceived notion or a bias? Because if you are, just knowing that that is there is the first step. You might not be silent the first conversation, but when the conversation blows up and didn't go your way, the next time you might understand your bias is there and be a little bit more silent to kind of listen to how this is going to play out. And listening actively is so hard, right? Most of us listen just enough to respond.
Mm-hmm.
And we totally miss the meaning of the message.
My team just did a exercise at one of our team meetings that was an improv. And we started it off with a situation. It was something silly, some made up awards that were bizarre awards. And so each person, I said, this is a exercise in both communication, but also active listening, because you cannot make your part of the story unless you pay attention to what's gone before you. And so they had to do that and, hot potato it around the room the virtual room, we're all virtual. It was interesting. Do you ever do any exercises like that with the people that you work with?
Yes, we definitely do. I play a really fun video in the leadership course, and it's a sales call, and it goes through the different steps, but I'll kind of stop them each time and like, what did you notice? And usually they didn't really notice anything at first, but then as it goes on and they hear the actors ask more questions and realize that the speaker, the salesperson by the end has kind of dropped their initiative for the call, which was to get an appointment, and focused on the speaker. And that's really where they start to see like, oh, okay, now I understand what you're saying because I'm speaking just to respond. And I'm very thankful. I've had some really good managers over the years. And when my first sales job was selling pet food, and I had a ride along with my manager. We got out into the car. How do you think that went? Which is the kiss of death question when you're a salesperson from your manager. And I was like, well, I thought it went well, but you're about to tell me how it didn't. And he said, you didn't listen. You gave some information. They asked you how much it cost. You continued to go on and tell them the cost and all the benefits. You could have stopped right there at cost. You had them, but you lost the sale because you didn't hear their cue. And that's when I really started understanding what active listening meant. I could have just stopped, right? We just want to spew information. We love to hear our own voices. But sometimes someone 3 seconds into the conversation tells you something and you've got to pivot. You may not get your message out because they're giving you a message that says, stop. We can't go on with this. I'm dealing with something else. So we do activities like that. And I will say that my last cohort, when we did the follow-up, one of the participants in the class said that even though it's a leadership course and we're finding our own leadership styles, it actually improved her marriage because she went home after the active listening session and realized that she doesn't listen to her husband's boring stories. Well, she started. Instead of checking out, she started listening and asking follow-up questions. And then he got excited because instead of just like nodding and going, he realized she was paying attention. And her marriage improved from an active listening class.
I believe it. I totally believe it. Any relationship, if you don't have good communication, if the person feels like they're being dismissed, it is, a formula for lack of success. And so I can believe that. That's actually one of the reasons why I don't preset questions for my interviews on the podcast. I just freewheel it.
Right. Because if you did, you would be like the salesperson like I was when I started, knowing I had a script, knowing I had all these points to hit, and then missing a really good conversation, right? Because you've got to get to question number 3. And active listening is part of emotional intelligence. Maybe you have high emotional intelligence, except you're not a good listener. You think you are, but you do a couple activities at home and realize, wow, I'm the problem. That has already improved your emotional intelligence.
Interesting. High IQ or EQ, whichever, but not an active listener. So they can live together, unfortunately.
Right. Because no one's perfect. And me personally, I try to find some little way to be better every day. It could be something so silly as I remember to take the trash out or something, right? Although that's my son's job. But I do try. But not everyone has a growth mindset. You know, my leadership course is based all on growth mindset. The first intro session is like, you have to have a growth mindset. If you don't have a growth mindset, why are you here? Just to check the box to say you took a leadership course? You have to be open to growth.
Tell me about that growth mindset. I'm curious here.
So you'll hear a lot of different definitions on growth mindset. Carol Dweck is kind of the godmother of growth mindset. I like to simplify it and just say growth mindset versus rigid mindset. If you have a growth mindset, you are open-minded to new opportunities and new points of view that maybe before you didn't agree with. You're not necessarily going to change your mind, but you're open to listen. Or you're open to new opportunities, right? Like maybe you didn't think that job was something you would ever do, but it feels good. You're going to take it. Whereas rigid mindset is, I already know. I don't need to learn. I don't need to change. I'm good.
You know what? We've actually started making this one of our competencies that we're looking for in people that we hire, that they have a growth mindset. And they don't have to be all the way there, but we want people who want to take those opportunities, step into something they're not familiar with necessarily. Because if they want to do just the same old thing, and we've had some of those people before, and we still do, we have some team members who just love the status quo. Fortunately, they're where they can get that. However, if they had to be in a place where they were constantly learning new things, that may make them very uncomfortable. So we've shifted a little bit to where new team members coming in need to display some aptitude for a growth mindset.
And that it makes me think of two things when you say that about your team members who maybe are happy where they are. One of the great things that I love about the Gallup Strengths, and it's a blind spot of mine that I have to remind myself, is because we are so innately good at the things we're good at, I have high learner. So for me, learning is a must every day. But sometimes we project that onto other people and we assume they all have it, right? So I assume my children also want to learn every day. Well, guess what? My freshman in high school son doesn't, unless it's music. So he doesn't have high learner. So for him to sit down and read a book is boring. And as a parent, that's frustrating. And so even with your employees who maybe don't want to learn something new, if you knew what their innate talents were, perhaps you could find the areas where they want to grow, where they're more comfortable with. And then the second thing that made me think of is we always say that people don't like change, right? Change is hard. Change management is so popular right now because companies don't know how to get their people to embrace change. When I was in my leadership program, I had a professor say a statement that has resonated with me. I changed the way I did sales after he said this, and it stuck with me, and I love to share it. He said that it's not necessarily the change that people are afraid of. It's the perceived loss that comes with the change. Okay. So if you can start approaching change with that idea, you might be able to get people to embrace change. And so I can give you an example. I was still in sales when I was going through my program. And one of the things that was so hard to sell was parasiticides, so flea, tick, and heartworm prevention. Veterinarians love to say, we've always done it this way. It's easier than, to explain why they don't want to change. And so I was getting my butt whooped by the competitor because they already had market share. So after the professor said that, I started going into my sales calls with this. We voice it this way. Well, what is it that you love about your product? Oh, we love A, B, and C. Well, our product does A, B, C, and D. Really? Yeah, here's the data. Wow. Well, do you think we could get some free samples to try on the staff? Absolutely. Boom. I blew my sales quota out of the water after I started approaching change that way.
I like that. I really
know.
like that.
I
And
did
it's simple.
too. It's so simple. And everybody's like perceived loss is different. So if you're trying to implement a change and you have people resistant, maybe you just ask them, what is it about the current system you love so much? And then try to let them know that the new system is going to have those things. It might look different, but it will be there. And if there is a real loss, what about the new system is going to make it okay that they lost that one thing?
Like more productivity or cost less or
Right.
something.
Exactly.
Saves you a lot of headache.
One of the things I talk a lot about, professional development, because that's what I offer in a lot of companies. And I have friends who are managers who say things like, oh, I hate that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff is so boring. And what I tell them is 94%, and this is from, I think, Forbes, Inc., Harvard Business Review, 94% of employees will stay with their current company even if someone else is offering them a raise, if they think the current company cares about their career growth. So if you are a company, if you have employees, if you can just offer them professional development that they want, not, that they're not interested in, if you'll pay for that, if you'll give them a day off to go take a day's class or something like that, they will stay. And retention is always cheaper than recruitment.
Amen.
Always.
I agree.
Always.
So tell me who your ideal client is.
My ideal client, I would love to work with women. I would love to empower women of all ages and all stages of their life. For my individual coaching, I love coaching women. For my online, I have online in-person leadership class. Would love for women to take that. But really for my workshops, I do a lot of, anyone who runs or is a member of a professional association. I do a lot of professional association meetings, a lot of annual leadership meetings, or really just someone who manages people. If someone owns a business or they're a manager of teams, they're perfect. Come on, reach out to me. We'll come in and do a workshop. And the fun thing about the workshops that I offer is all about the individual for the first half. Each person in that group gets to talk about themselves. But then the second half is, okay, now let's talk about the person across the table. Now you have a little bit of self-awareness. Now let's look at the person who maybe you have the most stress with at work. Now do you understand why? Because you guys have different strengths. You guys approach problems differently. So perhaps moving forward, and we do exercises, perhaps moving forward, instead of rolling your eyes because that person does something different than you could think to yourself, how can I collaborate with this person? Because they have skills that I don't.
I would say that's a red choice on the emotional intelligence, rolling your eyes.
Yeah.
When you said that, I was like, oh, probably not a good cue.
I use it a lot as an example because I, again, have a 13-year-old and so I see eye rolling. I see the white part of her eye more than what color her eye is.
Oh, no. She'll eventually grow out of being a teenager.
It's karma. It's karma. So I'm accepting it.
Sometimes you just got to. Okay. Erica, tell us how our listeners can find you after the show.
So I'm on LinkedIn, Erica Emmett, with FYR Consulting. I have a website, fyrconsultingus.com. They can just send me a message on LinkedIn, come to my website. I'm pretty easy to get in contact with. I am getting ready to launch the leadership course online, which is great. Right now it's in person, but I'm getting ready to launch it asynchronous so people can do their leadership journey at their pace, which is really awesome and fun. And it's all Gallup Strengths based.
Perfect. And FYR is FYR, not FIRE. The link will be in the show notes as well. Erica, thank you so much for being here today.
Denise, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me for today's podcast, where I focus on women in business and how we can be allies to one another. Please rate us on the podcast app that you listen to the most, and send me any ideas you have for podcast topics or any other feedback. I love to hear from my listeners. You can reach me at denise@dcavirtual.com.